It's time for Tech Talk at 18 past 9. He is with us in the studio, so I suppose we better do what we normally do and play the massive introduction that he gets each week. No one else gets this introduction, by the way, but Matthew does. Here we go.
It's time now for the latest news on what's hot and what's not in the world of technology with Matthew Dickerson on Tech Talk. Here on TCFM 88.9.
Good morning, Matthew. How are you?
I do feel so special, Richard.
Yes, I'm glad you feel special. We like having you on a weekly basis. Mate, the obvious question is, and the obvious bit of tech talk this morning is Facebook. Facebook.
It's all over the news, excuse the pun.
Well, yes. Oh, that's a dreadful pun. That's one of the worst puns I've heard this week. No, but you're quite right. It is. Okay, so look, where are we up to? When the government have done a deal with Facebook, has the government rolled over or has Facebook rolled over?
Well, I think Facebook's rolled over. So obviously what we saw was there was some argy-bargy between the government and Facebook, and not just Facebook, various social media companies were arguing about paying for news content. Google came to the party and they've done deals worth about $60 million with various news outlets in Australia, and that's what the government was trying to get them all to do. Facebook said basically no, in a very polite way. I'm sure they said something a little bit worse behind closed doors, but they said no. And so what they did as a slap in the face to the government was they banned all news sites from Facebook. So if you went to go to your favourite news site that you go and look at on Facebook, it was no longer there. It was just blocked, completely blocked. Obviously, that caught a whole bunch of other sites up as well, things that were fairly important. SES, for example, or information about COVID vaccine. Jimmy Barnes got blocked as well. I'm not sure how Jimmy Barnes got a news site, but anyway, he got blocked as well.
Bureau of Meteorology.
Yeah, so all sorts of ones that are sensible, just information sites. And so Facebook thought they were doing something to stick it into the Australian government, and I think it backfired on them pretty badly. I think the vote of public sentiment was, well, Facebook, if that's how you're going to play, we'll just leave Facebook and go somewhere else. What the government
typical Australian, isn't it?
It is. It's perfect.
It's typical Australia. They picked the wrong country.
They did, absolutely right. And they were trying to use Australia as an example because around the world, lots of governments want to do what the Australian government has been talking about doing. And to be honest, I think most other governments went, I'll see how it plays out in Australia before we go too much further. But what then happened was the Australian government came out and said, well, all the money we spend on Facebook advertising each year, about $10 million, we're going to stop that advertising. As of today, immediately all Facebook advertising will stop. So all government departments, Simon Birmingham came out and said, from a federal government perspective, no more money spent on Facebook. I'm sure lots of businesses did the same thing across the nation. So there was $10 million off the bottom line of Facebook, still a drop in the ocean for Facebook, but then all the businesses in Australia, and they probably had to start looking at that and saying, well, if we start losing all that income, are we better off just paying the money to news sites? So they continue negotiations, and the latest is they said they'll reinstate those news sites and we'll go and negotiate with some news organisations to pay them some money. That hasn't happened yet. News sites are still blocked at the moment, but they've promised they will start to release those.
Quote, over the next few days.
So what amazes me, Richard, is how quickly they were able to block them. Surely they could unblock them just as quickly. I'm sure there's not that much caching of news sites because you want news to be up to date. So surely they could unblock it just as quickly as they blocked it.
Oh, no, I mean, banks have been doing it for years. When interest rates go down or up, takes banks a while to adjust everything.
That's right.
Same with Facebook.
Same with petrol prices.
Same with petrol prices. I mean, there's nothing new, mate, in that one. Absolutely nothing new.
You can go quick in one direction when it's suitable and slow in the other direction.
Oh, yeah, when it doesn't suit you.
Anyway, so it should be a good outcome for news organisations in Australia, should be a good outcome for the government, and then from a Facebook perspective, the worst part is that around the rest of the world, other governments will say, right, now it's time for us to go in and continue the path.
Can you imagine if the United States of America said, we are going to stop all our government advertising on Facebook? It would be more than 10 million. Yeah. And that's what I think Facebook would be worried about.
I think you're right. I think the fact that they stopped that advertising, that a light bulb went on somewhere in Facebook, and they said, well, maybe this isn't such a smart move after all. And Blind Freddie could see it wasn't a smart move. No. If you go and take things away from the public will react.
And they did. Yeah. And they chose the wrong country because we're very good at reacting. I mean, I watched this thing last night on anti-vaxxers and I thought, Yeah. You know what we're like? We don't like to be told.
Yeah.
It's something in the nation. Let's not get into anti-vaxxers. Let's get on to smarter cars making us dumber drivers.
Yeah, it sounds
No,
harsh.
I disagree entirely.
Do you?
Well, look, I was thinking the other day, if you, say you step into a car and you know you're over the limit, you're absolutely legless, and your car drives you home safely without you doing anything, what's wrong with that?
And there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, apart from the fact that we're not quite there with fully autonomous yet. And I think this is the point from some driving instructors around the nation. They're saying that we've got technology that's added to cars. We haven't got the cars to go all the way yet, but people are becoming complacent, and some may say even arrogant because they've got cars. And it reminds me of a story when airbags were first being introduced, and it was in America, this story. People said, I don't need to wear a seatbelt anymore.
That's right, yeah.
I've got an airbag. Now, the seatbelt is the single greatest safety device ever invented for motor vehicles. Saved thousands, millions of lives probably around the world. And yet people said, I don't need to wear it anymore because I've got an airbag, that'll protect me. So I think the same way, people are maybe with some of the safety features in a modern car. And you've got things like ABS. I mean, I remember I learned to drive a car. You had to work out how to put the brakes on hard enough that you didn't lock up. And if you did lock up, to release the brake very quickly to get the wheels rolling again, to put the brake back on. That was a technique you learnt while you were getting your L plates and P plates. But of course now, no driver has to think about that. You just jam your brakes on as hard as you like, and the ABS takes care of it for you.
Or some cars even brake for you ahead of you. Yeah.
Exactly right, start to brake. So then we think, oh, I can drive a bit faster because I've got this wonderful ABS. Or I've got radar control, cruise control, or radar, as you say, braking before a car in front of you. A whole range of these safety features, lane keep. I can be a bit distracted because the car will keep in my lane because it'll start to let me know when I go outside the lane. But one of the stats that the driving instructors pointed to was that 30% of all car crashes in Australia are rear-end collisions. And their point was that rear-end collisions are really about lack of paying attention, tailgating, for example, staying too close to someone in front of you, and then maybe relying on the technology to warn you, maybe relying on the technology to keep you a certain distance from the car in front, to beep at you, to start to apply the brakes, all those things. And I got it just wrong, and I might have had a hard crash into that person in front. It was a softer crash because the technology helped, but you're relying on that technology somewhat to keep you a little bit safer. So the point is well made that maybe we are a little bit complacent with our various safety features. How you get around that, I don't know an answer to that. We're talking about human nature here. That's outside my area of specialty.
Indeed. I like my car. If you tailgate my car, the brake lights come on automatically, and it makes people back off. You look in the mirror and you think, oh, the tail lights have just come on. They think you're braking when you're not, which is a good feature. Okay. Now, why aren't people... I mean, I must be a sucker. I'm paying for Netflix, and I pay for Stan, and I pay for Prime and all these sort of things to watch movies and bits and pieces. I'm a sucker. I'm paying, but half of Australia isn't. Why is that?
I think we're a bunch of freeloaders is what we're working out.
That's another thing that's typical Australian, isn't it?
That's right. That's exactly right. But they're very popular, the streaming services. In fact, 63% of people said that they watched more streaming services during the pandemic. They're becoming very popular. There's no doubt about that. But only about half of Aussies are paying for their subscription services. And as you can imagine, the Gen Zers are the number one culprit. About 75% of Gen Zers said that they're watching streaming services, but they're not paying for it. And often they're on mum and dad's account, typically.
Yes.
So it's a very popular service. Netflix is number one. 69% of Aussies say they've got Netflix. It's somewhere in number two is around Stan, which is almost half of Netflix. About 36% of people watch Stan compared to Netflix. So Netflix is certainly ruling the roost. But again, I suppose the subscription service, the concept is that most people pay for the slightly better service, which comes with multiple screens. So it's not as if people are doing the wrong thing. Mum and dad have got Netflix. Oh, they've gone for the 4K subscription. They're paying $20 a month instead of $11 a month. Oh, that also gives you 4 simultaneous screens that you can watch. So the kids say, why would I bother about paying for it? I'll just use one of mum and dad's account for one of the screens. So the subscription services are encouraging that multiple use, but people are taking full advantage of it. There's no doubt about that at all. So they're very popular, but they're also at the point where only half of us are paying. Would everyone think they're as popular if they all had to pay for it? Probably still be almost as popular, but I think people like the idea of the free versions of it.
Yeah, probably true. I mean, I've got to say here, I was reluctant to join up with Stan, and I did join Stan. I think got some good stuff on.
Yeah.
There we are. How about a free subscription for a month, Stan? No, we're community radio. We're not allowed to accept those things like you do on commercial radio. It's very naughty. We get into trouble for that. It's against the law. We have to pay for everything. Microsoft Word in their bid to keep up with Google Docs. Interesting story.
Isn't that a turnaround?
Oh, yeah.
When all the Google Docs first came out, all the Microsoft suite of applications were the king of the castle, and Google Docs were trying desperately to catch up to there. Of course, it's at the point now where Google Docs has got a few features that the equivalent Microsoft products haven't got. One of them is predictive text. We're used to that on our mobile phones, where you start typing in a word and it gives you the rest of the word. And on the little tiny keyboard on a phone, that's fantastic. Google Docs thought that was a good idea to introduce that in their version, so that's been available there for some time. Microsoft Word thought, well, we don't need to worry about that, but it's proven fairly popular for Google Docs, so they're now introducing that in an update that will come out next month.
All right.
So you'll have predictive text. If you're a fantastically fast speed typist, I can't see it being a huge advantage for you, but for many people that are the old two-finger typists, the pointer finger on both hands, then seeing a word come up and they've only got to hit the tab key to fill in the rest of the word probably is a huge advantage.
Mate, I do that all the time. I do it all the time. Matthew, we're running out of time because of the Facebook situation, but very, 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 very quickly, just the VW. What's happening there?
Yeah, look,
Volkswagen.
You may remember that VW had their scandal with Dieselgate. I think it's silly that we chuck the gate on the end of any scandal these days, but anyway, Dieselgate as it was called. And that's probably about 6 years ago now, where they were tricking emission standards with some of their diesel cars. Now, they made a clear objective at the time where they said, Toyota's number one in the world, we want to knock them off their perch, but they cheated to get there. They're now seeing another opportunity with the electrification of vehicle fleets around the world. So they're introducing another new car, and they've got this whole platform that they have built around what the idea is to make it easy for them to build a variety of cars on that platform. So the base, if you like, will be essentially the same, and they'll stick a bunch of different tops on that. And so now their objective is to be the number one car manufacturer in the world on the back of EV. So they've got a very large strategy around EV, and they're also noting and pointing out that Toyota, who is number one in the world at the moment, who they wanted to try and knock off a few years ago, have not got a great EV strategy. They haven't got EVs, they've got hybrids, but they haven't got EVs.
That's right.
And it was fascinating earlier in this week, Lexus, who is obviously a subsidiary or a component of Toyota, brought out a brand new car and they teased it and they put all these little teaser videos, look out for the new Lexus IS and on they went. And then when they released it, there was a lot of discussion around it being finally an EV, Lexus performance vehicle, or maybe a hybrid, but they came out and said, we're reintroducing the V8. So it's a 5-litre V8. And I think the motoring world said, they've kind of gone the other direction where the rest of the world, VW, lots of car manufacturers are going for EV-only strategies. They're introducing a bigger engine vehicle. That doesn't make sense in the world we've got today. So VW here is seizing an opportunity, I believe. They're seeing an opportunity, they're seizing the opportunity to say, let's electrify. So they're going to bring out multiple models and just keep rolling out new models on this same platform. So keep an eye out on that. Unfortunately, some of these cars don't come to Australia because the Australian government is very much lagging. Electric car companies or EVs are being taken to countries first that have got some good policies that encourage the adoption of EVs.
Yeah, all right, an EV Golf. I mean, Golf's been very successful for VW.
They have been, yeah. A little performance EV Golf, I think, would be an absolute blasting seller in Australia.
What about an EV Beetle? Bring back the Beetle.
I think that'd be great. I think people would love that.
All right.
Yeah.
Good talking with Matthew. We'll see you next week for Tech Talk.
Sounds good.
Okay, it's coming up to 29 to 10. This is DCFM 88.9.